Hello, this is a short narrated presentation I made about how YouTube is utilized in academia and some questions for further consideration. So I thought it was appropriate to share this recent presentation that I gave here on YouTube. So let's give it a go. So just to give a little bit specific personal background on this, obviously my background is in academia. I was a faculty member at Penn State in the beginning of my career, and that's where I had my first experiences starting to develop online studio-based courses. Now, this at the time was still very controversial. People felt that studio-based courses could only be taught in person, that there's no way to kind of replicate the experience of what you would have being all together in the studio. Now, the initial motivations for this were financially driven. The School of Visual Arts at that time was not particularly large, and it seemed like developing online courses would be a way to raise credit hour production, which would increase funds to the school. Then I was fortunate to have a new position at the University of North Texas starting in 2009. And a couple years after arriving, I developed and began teaching a asynchronous online digital fabrication course each summer. So this made a lot of sense to me that students that were interested in digital fabrication would most likely be working with online service providers and getting the experience online through the course would help train the students to be working online. And, quite honestly, my colleagues trusted me and believed in me, but it was seen again still as strange, and they just sort of tolerated the course. But again, there was that thinking that studio-based courses should happen in the studio all together in kind of smaller in-person experiences. Now, obviously, COVID changed all of that and changed it all really quickly. But even before that, because of my experience in teaching online, I was involved in redesigning our undergraduate required course in professional practices. So prior to our redesign of the course, it was online, but it wasn't particularly robust. And so we put a great deal of effort into generating a lot of new content, tons of new videos, and really making a very well-rounded and content-rich course that could really be of use to our students. And you can see from my statistics in YouTube that I am hardly an influencer, but I do regularly keep up with my YouTube channel, and I find, particularly sort of after the initial COVID push, that it was a fantastic place to just make all of the different videos that I created for the reference of my students, make it accessible to others beyond those students that I was working with in the classroom. I still teach metalsmithing and jewelry techniques in person, and any of the videos that I'm creating are just to supplement that or to disperse the knowledge more widely. Now, those of you that may or may not be familiar with kind of the workload of a faculty member at a research university, is it typically divides up this way, where 50% of our efforts and accomplishments are evaluated under the research umbrella, and our teaching is around 40% of it, and service is typically around 10%, and service being committees within our unit, our department, our college, our university, as well as professional service like serving on the board of national organizations and things like that. However, those of you in academia realize that as long as nothing is terribly flawed in your teaching, it's not nearly valued as highly as your major research accomplishments. Now, this is just kind of a general overview of how I'm aware that YouTube might be used, divided up by the different workload types within that kind of research faculty member. And you can see that there's a range of different opportunities here. I think teaching is probably what's thought of most most commonly and probably service the least, although there are certainly amounts of messaging and training that is done through the ease of YouTube. And I think we're all familiar now with that impact of COVID and how quickly everybody had to shift to being able to utilize technology. And YouTube was probably one of the most accessible and heavily used resources that were used in the shifting of that. Now, the primary means of evaluation as our colleagues are looking at our accomplishments and evaluating the kind of the impact of our accomplishments is peer review is continues to be valued most highly. And I was told sort of flat out at certain points that YouTube really would not be considered in under kind of a research umbrella because it was not a peer-reviewed platform. And it depends how you're looking at peer review. There's certainly extensive metrics available to look at the impact of particular videos and who it's reaching and how much impact it's having as far as how many people are watching, how long they're watching, things like that. And so it depends which peers you're considering and what type of reviews you're considering. Now, there are some potential issues, obviously, with publishing this content publicly, and that many faculty research and teaching methods you're building up over a career, and to coincide with things such as museum events, those are planned years in advance, as opposed to YouTube videos can be published instantaneously. There's some other questions I think that people are wrestling with as far as equivalencies, intellectual property, uh, accessibility, as far as if something's being used under a university context, that accurate transcripts are required, and those can be labor intensive and therefore very expensive or time intensive, depending on who's doing those kinds of transcripts. And then also just inherent prejudices that people might have if you're using something that has such mainstream popularity as YouTube. And there are, I believe, obviously, since I'm speaking about this, that there's huge value in the use of YouTube. Even this presentation that I put together is because of my involvement with YouTube. And I've found that students have made great use of those resources, and so it's fed back in and increased student satisfaction with courses that I'm teaching, improving student evaluations of my teaching as well, and also has enabled increased participation even on the service end, as far as professional organizations and being able to document events and then share those events either publicly or to their membership through links. And I think that there's aspects of this evaluation that need to be reexamined. And so looking at, the consideration of viewing metrics for one way of measuring impact and effectiveness of research, giving credit to faculty for their time spent on generating all of this new content, and then looking at ways, particularly within professional organizations that have smaller budgets, ways that different things could be documented and shared or archived over time. There's also the consideration of what resources are being used, both in equipment and staffing, and how they might be equitably allocated depending on what is being documented and how it's being shared. And there's certainly complications to all of this. So, for example, when I've used institutional resources to create videos, even if they're shared through the institution's YouTube channel, the timeline is significantly longer than if I was producing those videos myself. Now, obviously, there's a big quality gap between having a professional film crew versus me kind of DIYing it. But then also considerations of intellectual property. So what stays under the umbrella of the institution versus what might be shared on a faculty member's individual YouTube channel. And I did reach out to a lot of friends and colleagues across academia through emails and through social media calls, and there were an interesting cross-section of kind of feedback and input that I received, and I got everyone's permission to share that within this presentation. And I just want to share some folks' thoughts, and even though that they may or may not be similar to my own thoughts. And so like Lonnie Graham's perspective on setting some thresholds for different posts and considering that and giving sort of fair consideration of that versus the impact that might be from an exhibition or a publication run. With Wagner's work, considering the work that goes in behind the scenes. And so obviously there's budgetary impact on those credits, and figuring out a fair way to do that. We all face sort of emergency situations when we had to pivot quickly with COVID, and maybe re-examining that and seeing how we can put something in place that is a little bit fairer on the consideration and compensation of the efforts put in by faculty. And another colleague from the jewelry and metalsmithing world that solidly sees any of the YouTube content under teaching and service, not under any of the professional research, unless your particular field might be in education. And James Hofstenberger, who is a past College Art Association president, brings up the standards and guidelines that College Art puts out there to help guide institutions across the country as they're developing their own policies and procedures, and that it's our responsibility to question where we are right now and to be proactive in the development of those policies, particularly within our home institutions. And this is an excerpt that I just wanted to include from some of those guidelines, where already College Art has included a segment about considering that data from viewers or users of work is a type of documentation that is important to be included. Another colleague from the metalsmithing and jewelry world, where she created a huge amount of video content, over 150 videos, but consciously kept them off of YouTube because they were specific to students that were paying tuition and wanted to be sure that those students felt that they were getting value for their investment and their educational dollars. And in another kind of aspect that I haven't emphasized as much is some of the opportunities that arise from these technologies. And so Jack Da Silva, who, given a personal health situation, can no longer be teaching in person, but is able to continue his career because of the use of newer technologies that kind of post-COVID are now readily adopted across the board. I think that everyone is expected to be able to, handle a Zoom meeting or work with course management softwares like Canvas or access or post videos on YouTube and so on. And so there's certainly other aspects here that those technologies are facilitating. So I think that there's a lot of questions that we can consider as we move forward, and looking at them both nationally, internationally, and as well as bringing back to our own home institutions and seeing what kind of policies are in existence, how they might be evolved to take into account current practices, seeing what institutional support, if you are a faculty member, might be available to you, and what are the pros and cons of utilizing that support, figuring out who is responsible for compliance to different accessibility requirements based on how different content might be used, and always the sticky question of intellectual property and how that might be navigated depending on what resources are supporting the generation of the content. And then even, starting to consider different types of employment situations where, particularly within the studio arts, for the longest time that was considered that it had to be an in-person experience. And we saw through COVID that it can shift, and it's obviously not the same type of experience as being in person, but there's completely viable alternatives and other possibilities that might make those experiences available to a wider group of students that might not otherwise have those opportunities. So I hope that this little presentation has provided some information, as well as prompted some questions and further discussions about it. Thanks for checking it out. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can hear from me when I post future videos. Thanks for stopping by.